I'm Cameron Bradley, and this is my project, The Ethics of Tigers in Captivity, a Green Criminological Perspective. And in this project, we are going to be looking at the ethics of keeping tigers in captivity, along with regulations that follow. Limited regulation. Regulations in general for tigers and other big cats are limited. Tiger Conservation Act is one of these, which I have up on the screen for y'all. Under the Rhinoceros and Tiger Conservation Act, it is illegal to import or sell any products intended for human consumption that contain or are labeled as containing any substance derived from rhinoceroses or tigers. And this quote is from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Captive Wildlife Safety Act is another, which is an attempt to limit the trade of exotic animals. With all this in mind, there is not one regulation in place for the breeding of tigers and big cats. It is clear to see how there is room for exploitations which have been taking place. Amount of cats in captivity. Due to the habitat of these animals disappearing due to deforestation, there is an increasing number of captive tigers in the United States. There is an overwhelming number of tigers and big cats in the U.S. Data collected from the Humane Society suggests that fewer than 400 of the estimated 5,000 to 7,000 captive tigers are held at accredited facilities of the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. And this association is put into place to make sure that the treatment of animals and their rights is being upheld. Despite the passage of the Captive Animal Safety Act in 2004 and bans on exotic animal ownership in 19 states, this quote basically states that with only 400 of these tigers being housed at accredited facilities, that they are being held at unaccredited facilities such as private owned zoos, private homes, and breeding facilities and places such as that. And also, there is no regulation put into place for how many cats you can have in one enclosure. For instance, this is one cage in a facility and it is housing 7 cats at once, which comes into question how the treatment of these animals is being portrayed and how the upkeep of their best interests is being shown. Breeding. A lot of small zoos and private owners are breeding tigers and big cats as a lucrative business. For example, by a statement made by Leni Fejah, she says, "These people are just doing it for money and not the thought for Thailand's reputation or conservation." And with this statement, she is basically showing how all of these private owned facilities in Thailand are taking their own interests into consideration when these animals are being exploited and abused for nothing more than monetary gain. And there's another quote which says, "What they want is to end up selling tiger steaks and soup with the sole purpose is to not take the animals into consideration." And this is one of the statements made by Pittsburgh Post. One tiger temple in the in Thailand, which is a sanctuary for tigers, was raided by the Thailand Wildlife Conservation Office due to concerns brought up from tourists who visited this facility and saw mistreatment of these animals by the way they were put into their enclosures, and also that there was a slaughterhouse facility within the facility which would kill and cut up the tigers after they serve their purpose, because a business like this uses cubs for cub petting, and they would use that to attract tourists and whatnot to get monetary gain. And after their purpose for the animal it was up, they would get rid of the animal because it basically already served their purpose and they had no more need for it. And also in China, they would kill tigers and other exotic endangered animals and for nothing more than their resources. For tigers, what they would use them for is their bones and fur and whatnot, and basically kill these endangered animals which are already being abused and exploited for monetary gain and using their resources. Pets. In the United States, there is a increasing number of frequency of exotic animals as pets. For example, about 15,000 lions, tigers, and other big cats are being kept as pets in the United States alone. This is private home ownership of the exotic big cats. There are too many harms with this practice, and in some cases not enough regulation. One of the one is the environments being insufficient for the wild animals. The space at a typical home could never be adequate for a large scale animal. Another danger with this practice is safety. There would have been countless times that a big cat, which has been a private animal, has escaped at the fault of the owner and have been killed for this. The public is also in harm's way because of the dangerous wild nature of the animals. For example, between 1990 and 2010, 172 large feline carnivores also escaped, with an unclear number of these animals recaptured or killed, and 94 captive large felines were killed. In 2011, the Big Cat Rescue Database, another large animal welfare organization, indicated 75% of all animal attacks were reported in the United States, but it did not provide the numbers of the incidents, which was administered by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. In this department, happens to have jurisdiction over all exotic animal care in the United States. This main issue as having pets of this size, which are exotic animals, are the treatments and environment for the animals being insufficient for what they need to to just live as is, and also a safety hazard for the owner for the inadequate safety practices they have, as well as if the animal gets out, the public is in harm's way. Tiger King illustrations. Quality of life. In this picture, we have Carol Baskin, which is the owner of Big Cat Rescue. And behind her is part of her facility, which has a big cage where the big cats are housed in, as well as a smaller cage for the animals to eat and drink, which shows lack of quality of life in terms for the animals. This is also the feeding method that they use for the animals, which, needless to say, doesn't show like they're taking the animals' rights into consideration. And these privately owned zoos and facilities are also wealth focused, which means they administer cub petting, for instance, to attract business, or they breed to keep the number of cats that they have up to draw more people in. And it honestly shows a lack of regulation for them to be able to exploit the animals in this way and get away with it. And there's also a lot of realistic dangers, even with environments such as you see in this picture. There's still ways that these cats could harm you. For instance, at the GW Zoo in the documentary, a worker stuck his arm in a cage with which was a violation of their feeding procedure, and lost his arm because of it. So it is easy to see how the regulations or lack thereof show that there is a big problem present, and it needs to change in terms of regulation of ownership, as well as facilities being able to treat animals such as this. Conclusion: there has been limited regulation for big cats ownership and having cats in captivity. For instance, breeding. There is no regulation for breeding and cub petting, which is exploiting cats for monetary gain. There is also a vast number of cats in captivity. This is because of the laxed laws for ownership of big cats, as well as the lack of regulations for ownership and proceedings of how they treat the animals. There's also no regulation or laws for breeding. If a person theoretically wanted to breed every day for a year, they could legally do that, even if they didn't have the sufficient space or ability to take care of this animal. And the documentary Tiger King also shows a lack of morality and a lack of natural rights for the animals, and a lack of consideration for them, for the way that they are treated and housed and exploited for nothing more than monetary gain. So, with all of this in mind, it's easy to see how the lack of regulations is clear, and how the interests of the animals is not being taken into account, and there is exploitation of these animals being used in today's society.